But we're gonna focus today on an overview, really looking at the formula, the personal injury attorney marketing formula. So that's the focus of what we're going to be looking at today. Some of it will be familiar, and we're going to mix it, but we're primarily going to be looking at the general overview of essentially the personal injury attorney formula and what's optimal to establish that relationship and the pieces of each. So let's go ahead and get started. Now remember, when we do our personal injury attorney marketing, we start with a marketing list, and we've covered some of these topics we've covered in different videos. But essentially, remember, we're going to start with a list. And we want the list to be narrow more than broad. In other words, we'd rather have a smaller list than a larger list, because this list we're going to stay on top of. We're going to regularly communicate with these people and convert them. And we're going to have multiple contacts. So we want to make sure that it's within our budget and within our control, as opposed to a broad list. And this is a common mistake in marketing: is too big of a list to start with and terrible follow-up and processing. So we want a much more narrow list with excellent communication vertically. And remember, there's three ways to accumulate a list in any marketing. There's three of the best ways to accumulate a list. The number one way is to reverse engineer your present client-based, patient-based, information-based, etc. So that's the very first thing you want to do, is reverse engineer with your present attorneys. And because remember, we're going to be paying a lot of attention to four factors. We're going to be paying a lot of attention to trust, defenses, resistance, and confidence. And what can we do to affect the trust, defenses, resistance, and confidence, the systems and methods? And then also, when we go into establishing need, we're going to see that it's a ratio. There's a lot of peripheral players, but essentially need is what is the circle of trust of that communication, how much trust is there, relative to need versus obstacles. So those are essentially the absolute core of marketing in any product or service. But now let's apply it to personal injury attorney marketing. So the first part of the list, obviously, is reverse engineering your existing list. Any of your attorneys that you do or have worked with in the past, because there's already some form of a relationship awareness. It may not be much at all, even if you've worked with them for only maybe one case 5 years ago, but that's better than not working with them one case 5 years ago. So also, the other way to accumulate data is through trade journals and magazines. You can get information through trade journals and magazines to help accumulate information, and also data centers. So there's data centers that you can contact to accumulate lists with very high specificity. Now, when we're accumulating that list, we talked about the formula. What are we wanting to do when we have this list? Because this is your goal. And remember, we're going to start with that list, but it's going to be changing. There will be attorneys that we move out of it for different reasons. You may find out they don't believe in chiropractic, and then there's attorneys we may move into it. So it will be a dynamic list. It will not be a stagnant list, okay? And that will be dependent on your communication interactions as you move along. But we're going to start with that list. So we want to make sure that first, when we start, we make sure we abide by the demographics. So what are the highest probability of demographics? And we talked about that, many of these, in a separate video. And what we're doing is just trying to put all this together to create some clarity and vision of this marketing program to increase its and maximize its effectiveness. So we talked about making sure you have the highest probability of demographics. Now, before I keep going on this, I'd like to talk to you, say about the bell curve. Remember, every time we talk about a list, there's the bell curve of that list. And so often, doctors don't recognize the bell curve of a list, whether it's gateways, whether it's needs, whether it's primary service factors or secondary service factors. And the bell curve, in other words, it's back to the 80-20 principle. That's Pareto's law. And remember, he was the economist who essentially showed that a minority is a lot of times responsible for the majority. And the example is with gateways and chiropractic. 84% of the patients who come to chiropractic are for back pain, neck pain, and headaches. Another example is if you checked your revenue sources, you'd find that the vast majority of your revenue, 80% or close to it, these are not hard, fast numbers, but it's relationship-wise, comes from 20% of your patient base. In other words, every category, it is not an equal distribution. And this is a very common mistake that marketers, doctors make. So remember, every category there is a bell curve. The bell curve is the 80-20 principle, and essentially we're looking for the highest probability. In other words, what is the sweet spot of that topic? Not the peripheral low-lying topics. So please keep that in mind. We want the bell curve of each topic. So when we do a demographics, when we're accumulating our list, and we evaluate personal injury attorneys based on demographics, we're going to go through the criteria of demographics. And we want the bell curve of the attorneys who fit into that demographic profile, not the sliver that's low probability or low possibility. That's not what we want at all. So please pay attention to that as you go through each category. Now, the same with psychographics. So we start with our list, and our list includes demographics. It includes psychographics. That was covered in another video also. Remember, that was the lifestyle, attitudes, and belief system, and how important that particular topic was. And then we talked about the geographics, and geographics is absolutely imperative, and we talked about that also in a different video. So remember, we're looking at, when we're accumulating our list, to pay high attention to these categories, assimilating our list, and making sure that you have the bell curve, the sweet spot, the highest probability in each of these categories to increase your effectiveness. So then also we talked about the psychographic barriers, and again, that was also a separate entity in a separate video. And we talked about the gateways, and this is very important, and this is probably the absolute #1 reason chiropractic is at only 8% utilization, is when you try to be everything to that personal injury attorney, you are essentially nothing. And unfortunately, remember, as a chiropractor, unfortunately, there's a certain amount of negative name recognition already associated, whether it's true or not, but those are the facts. And so this negative name recognition kind of puts you at an undermine. So you'll have less credibility from the get-go with no other factors as opposed to a medical doctor. Now, that's being very generic. There's certainly ways to overcome that, but you have to be aware. So the gateways, and so relative to the gateways, and that's when we talked about the conditions you should focus on. One of the worst things you could do as a chiropractor is approaching an attorney and tell them how you treat everything. Well, your credibility just went down significantly. So remember, to get credibility in any one particular category, give up a category. And that's why we talked about the 4 major conditions relative to gateways, which was the connective tissue injury, the disc injury, the peripheral nerve injury, and the mild concussion being the top injuries on a percentage basis. Those were the bell curves. And by the way, the absolute bell curve is the connective tissue injury followed by the disc injury. That's the absolute sweet spots of injuries. And then we talked about how the connective tissue gateway is by far your competitive advantage, and it has the absolute largest segment of the target market. So if you give away these other conditions and try to be everything, it increases and focuses your credibility to what you're trying to focus it to. So that's the bell curve of gateways, and remember, that's why I highly suggest the best, most credibility is coming in with the answer to the connective tissue. And we talked about that on a different video, the importance of that. And then the vehicle of delivery. So what are the vehicle of delivery? Well, personal injury attorneys will pay attention to, or routinely will see some things way more than others. They'll pay attention to other forms of communication more so than others. And we're going to talk about not only the vehicle of delivery coming in, but also multi-channels, the importance of coming in through multi-channels. What does that do from a marketing perspective? So after we've accumulated our list like that, remember, we're talking about when we talk about Advertising, we're talking about the formula, which is problem, identifying the problem, solution being the solution, problem, solution, YU is endorsements, testimonials, and then the offer a deadline. So we're going to go through that specifically. Now, also remember that the sales cycle that we all have, whether we're buying a Snickers bar, a gallon of milk, a house, a large product, purchase product, or a small product. The sales cycle, our natural subconscious sales cycle, is 4 steps. First, there's the need analysis. Secondly is the presentation. Third is the obstacles, and fourth is the close. That is the order that your material also should be communicated and delivered. So there should not be a presentation prior to the need being established. There should not be an obstacle discussed prior to a need being evaluated or a presentation. And you certainly shouldn't be trying to close, meaning trying to get business without there being a need established or the solution to the need, or definitely handling what are called primary or secondary obstacles. So that's the 4th stage. So just be aware that there is a cycle that we naturally will purchase as human beings. This is not dependent on personal injury attorney. This is how I purchase. This is how you purchase. This is how we purchase everything. If it's a small purchase and there's less consequences and less risk, then that cycle will be much faster. If there's huge risk involved, then it takes a longer amount of time. And remember, a referral from a personal injury attorney is much greater risk than you referring your patient to, say, a orthopedic surgeon, etc. That referral from an attorney pays his salary. It pays his primary survival. So there's way more emphasis on the personal injury attorney referral to who they're referring to, because their livelihood depends on that referral. Whereas when you refer to a patient, your livelihood doesn't depend on that referral. Typically, you've gotten paid either through insurance or etc. So you can kind of walk away. That's not the case here. So be aware of the importance of that also. So, and then there's the, after the close, then there's the post-close with essentially assurance, and essentially that is known as trying to make sure that there's not what's called buyer's remorse. So there's follow-up with assurance on the personal injury attorney patient, as well as the follow-up. And the follow-up is very important to continue that relationship. So we're going to go into detail of each of these specifically a little bit more. Okay. Now, let me just talk a little bit about the vehicle of communication. Remember, there's multiple vehicles of communication, and I just said something about multi-channels. Well, and remember, we're always working on 4 factors. Every time we're marketing, we're always working on trust, defenses, resistance, and confidence, number 1. And we're always paying attention to need versus obstacles. Remember, it's in that circle of trust, it's need versus obstacles that are absolutely paramount in the core of the business. So one of the byproducts of increasing trust, there's many ways to affect trust and confidence and defenses and resistance, and we're going to go into many of those. We employ many of these factors that the byproducts will increase trust, decrease resistance and defenses, and increase confidence. Well, one of them is multiple vehicle communications, is multiple channels of communication, and multisensory. And essentially what that is we naturally will increase the trust when there's multiple contacts, and this, of course, as long as it doesn't violate a paradigm. So as long as we're not doing or saying anything that's really unusual to our target market, then these are pretty much true. That the multiple contacts, whether it's letters or postcards or DVDs or phone calls or whatever, that multiple contacts will naturally increase trust, decrease defenses. Now, and these are channels, so we're going to be paying attention to multi-channel marketing. So we're not only going to come in vertically from a particular position, but we want to do a multi-channel, and essentially this doesn't cost anything like it would have cost 20 years ago prior to the internet. Because when you come in, and the example that I use is if you're driving to work and you see a business on a billboard, and then you keep driving, and then you hear it on the radio, and then you're driving into your office and you see it on the bench right in front of your office, that exact product or service. There's a natural phenomenon that occurs. The authority of that particular item will go up naturally, whether it's true or not. That's a natural byproduct. The trust will go down just because of the will go up because of the multiple contacts, and the defenses will go down. They'll seem like they're the norm. So multi-channel distribution is another effect of affecting trust, defenses, confidence, and resistance. And we'll talk about how we employ that. So let's go ahead and get through the formula here. So here we are. There's a 3-phase formula to the personal injury attorney marketing. It starts with publicity. Now remember, when you're looking at the S-curve, the beginning people of the S-curve are more proactive in utilizing a product or service, to the middle part, to the last part, the laggards who are the last. So the marketing formula, when you have your target market, the optimal formula is publicity first, advertising second, and sales third. Not sales first. It's publicity first, advertising second, sales third. Now this is how we would like to attack and focus in on your list. And remember, your list should already be positioned optimally. In other words, you should already have a list with introduction personal injury attorneys, passive referral personal injury attorneys, and active referral personal injury attorneys. So your list should already be in a higher trust category to start with, number one. Number two, when you pick the bell curve of the demographics, the sweet spot, you increase your probability of doing business. Number three, when you ensure the psychographics of the bell curve, you've increased your likelihood of getting the business. When you've paid attention to the geographics, the sweet spot of the geographics, all these factors add up to increase your likelihood of getting that business, and certainly making it easier on you. So demographic, psychographics, geographic, psychographic barriers relative to these factors. Now, once we have that list, we're already positioned well. Now the next thing that we're going to want to do is use publicity to that list. And essentially what that means, and again, what is publicity used for? Publicity is used for really two major things. Number one is to increase trust. And publicity is third-party recognition, and it's used for trust and authority. That's what publicity is used for. And really to get the low-hanging fruit. What's the low-hanging fruit? It's your target market who already has a state of awareness and need, and they're actively or proactively looking for what you're wanting to sell with your product or service. So that's publicity. Now, with the personal injury attorneys, that's not going to happen too much. It's very rare you're going to find a personal injury attorney who just happens to be looking for a chiropractor in that particular geographic location. And those windows don't stay open long, because as soon as they need somebody in that area, they'll find it pretty fast. So, but that's what it's for, is to increase the trust. So remember, we're working on 4 factors: trust, confidence, defenses, and resistance. So we start with publicity. And what are some of the forms of publicity? Well, that's when there's endorsements, there's testimonials, if you've ever been featured in an article, if you've written an article, if you're a speaker, if you've spoke before, you speak periodically. If you're a teacher, if you hold a position in an organization. Now, obviously, all of these should be relevant to the target market, but that is publicity, and it increases authority and trust. And so when I was a speaker at 3 chiropractic colleges, there was a tremendous amount of trust and authority that was essentially the byproduct bestowed just because I was the speaker at 3 colleges and they saw that. So if you've spoke to a relevant topic, either the topic or the organization, maybe you've talked to the local attorney group, maybe you do something with the local attorney group. In other words, it's relevant to that particular target market. That's what's important. Now, what we do is we use press releases and books. That's what we use for publicity. So we will create a press release, and we'll cover that separately on how I'll create a press release for you. And we use that press release and we send that out first. And so the first thing we're trying to do is increase name recognition and awareness, and increase the trust and confidence, and decrease the defenses and resistance as we move along for the personal injury attorney marketing. So we'd like to use publicity first for the personal injury attorney marketing. Now, remember, we're doing the effects of multiple contacts. Is it better to send publicity or have your target market receive publicity more than one time? Yeah, because remember the law of multiple contacts. If they were exposed to that publicity, those third-party trust factors, multiple times, the impact it has on trust. Trust goes up, defenses go down. So this is important also, as well as multi-channel. What if they receive publicity from this particular channel and then saw it from this particular channel or venue? These are natural ways to increase the trust and confidence and decrease the defense and resistance. And we haven't even talked about content yet. It's just the method of delivery that's already working for us. So we're going to be paying attention to these factors. So we start with publicity, and remember the key thing about publicity is that it's third party. It's seen as third party. It's seen as somebody else essentially giving you the credit for that relevant topic. It's not seen as you blowing your horn, and that's the primary reason there's the trust. Also, if they trust that particular source, then there's natural trust that will be bestowed upon you. If that source did, like let's say the Trial Attorneys Association, there was an article or they interviewed you, well, now there's automatically bestowed trust upon you just from that interview in the vehicle of communication that they already have a higher degree of familiarity and trust with. Now, we can create these things, and we do create them. So we start with publicity. Also be aware that we do the press releases, and we'll talk about exactly how we do that in a different video. And we do the book. So also making you the author, because when you're the author of a book, that's the highest form of authority that is perceived. And that's why with my clients, we make you authors of books, and we use those books for the publicity. And obviously the book is relevant to personal injury attorney and processing cases, etc. So these are the two categories that we use with our clients, is the press release and the author of a book, to help start the cycle of marketing with publicity. And then obviously it's better if there were multiple contacts instead of you just sending one. It would be better if there were multiple positions, they received multiple contacts of that publicity. That would be better than one. Two would be better than one. Three would be better than two. Also, if there were different channels, whether it's a book or it's a press release, etc. If there were different channels, that increases the trust and confidence likewise, which makes the actual your advertising, makes them more receptive to your advertising message. And then also remember, at the after advertising, we do the sales. So essentially we're kind of warming them up, kind of like the frog in the hot water. We're going to start with lukewarm publicity, and we're going to take them to hot, and we're going to cook them in sales. And along the way, you're going to some business can occur along the way from this process. So that's it, the press release and the book. Let's see here, introduction, referrals. So remember, again, what's the focus that we did? We started with introduction, a high probability target market of introduction attorneys. We covered that. Where you're starting with a active referral list, passive attorney referral list, and we're trying to impact or affect trust, confidence, defenses, and resistance in every aspect, and preferably multiple times. Now, the problem typically right here is the chiropractor doesn't want to wait for that. He wants to just jump the gun, and he wants it now. And so there's many other natural negative things that you'll do with marketing, but that's one of them, is not wait around to cook the attorney. You want the business now, and you'll create high paradigm shifts, and you'll wonder why maybe what you didn't work as well now. So that's one aspect to be highly aware of. All right, so you have your list. We've sent them multiple press releases. Let's say they've gotten the book. So you can imagine if this happened to you with a target market, what's happening to your name recognition of this company, this business, your awareness, and obviously the topic of these are primary need topics. And remember, the primary need topics with attorney is the money they're losing or how to make more money from their cases or more clients. So that's where the publicity and the book angle, the topic needs to be relevant. So then we go to advertising. Now, after the publicity cycle, however short we're going to make it, even if it's one is better than none. Okay? So even if it's very small and short, we'd like to start with that. Number two, from there, we're warming up our target market. Now we're going to go to advertising. Now remember, there's two types of advertising. There's name recognition advertising and direct response advertising. We do not want to do any form of name recognition advertising at all. Let me say that again. We do not want to do any form of name recognition advertising at all. We're in the business of getting business, and so we want to be proactive and be as focused and narrow as we can to get the business. So we're going to do direct response advertising. That's why we pay attention to demographics, psychographics, geographic, psychographic barriers, all these things, instead of just shooting out randomly to a group of attorneys. So direct response is how we're going to pay attention. Now, there's two types of marketing. One is top-down marketing, or you may have heard it as inbound or outbound. It's called top-down versus bottom-up marketing, or an inbound versus outbound type of marketing. And the short to that is we would much rather did our direct response advertising and look for who has an interest. In other words, we have all of these narrow factors involved with demographic, psychographics, geographic, psychographic barriers, gateway, all that. And we would rather put bait out there, something that they would want or have an interest in, and then see who essentially raises their hand, see who pays interest in that. Because the person, now this is called inbound marketing, and inbound marketing is way more effective than outbound marketing. So this is why we do the videos and with the autoresponders and send out the letters and follow-up postcards to push attorneys to your website with this information and to help establish need and affect trust defenses and have the visualization and the automation of repetition. Because the personal injury attorney who is proactive in any of those marketing vehicles that you do that's inbound, you have a significantly higher likelihood of getting business from that attorney, significantly higher. As a matter of fact, you'd rather have 70 or 80% of your people not sign up or show up, and only 5, 10, or 15% of the attorneys sign up for that list than with inbound marketing, than just marketing to everybody, which is outbound. In other words, just pushing it out to everybody. Because that 5, 10, or 15% list who signed up, you have a serious, significant ability to get business from that attorney and establish the relationship. You've crossed so many conscious and subconscious barriers. So be aware of the difference, and I'll cover this also in detail in a separate video, but of the difference versus what's called top-down versus bottom-up marketing. And essentially top-down is just going to everybody anywhere and letting them do what they want. That's a very general way of saying it. Versus bottom-up or inbound marketing. In other words, having a highly specific target market with direct response marketing, with the demographics, psychographics, geographics, paying attention to the bell curve. Putting bait out there, essentially, saying if this could be impactful or helpful to you, and then asking them to respond. And then obviously it's best if we have automated follow-up, because how it affects trust, defenses, resistance, and confidence. That's why a video every day is helpful. The message needs to be relevant. and those people that sign up, even if they don't call you, they're way more likely. You're way more likely to get business because of those effects that are being put in place. So that's essentially what happens. Is we bait them. It's based on need, and the bait that we kind of use is we'll send out the highest primary target subjects, which is the loss of money or the gain of money, essentially within the titles that we put out there, and then it gives it establishes the need. In other words, it's sharing with them all these videos and the information, and it's all automated and visual. It's sharing the need, because remember, we buy in a 4-step cycle: needs analysis, presentation, obstacles, and codes. So essentially, we're covering the need, establishing the need, and remember, with personal injury attorneys, the money they lose is unconscious. It's a subconscious. It is not awareness. They do not know, and if they know, they act on it, and they act on it real fast. Most attorneys have no idea how much money they're losing by not having a doctor who can process properly a connective tissue case in addition to the other injuries. They just don't know that. Remember, it is not a conscious awareness. So that video material, that visual material, it's visual. Why is that important? 55% how he communicates visual. It's you. It's not generic. Why is that important? It affects trust, confidence, defenses, and resistance. They already are being sold on you before you even say anything when they see a video of you more than one time. So essentially what that does is establish, takes them from unconscious incompetence or increases in awareness or curiosity, and either a call to action for them to call in, or we're going to proactively come to them because we're in a now much more favorable position. So remember the advertising message. So we want to make sure we identify the problem, the primary need. We do not want to be talking about service factors without a primary need. And I say this over and over and over, because if you're not aware of the chess players of the game, you can spend all your time on a secondary service factor that's totally irrelevant, and they don't have need or perceived need. So that's why we covered primary need factors. You always have to establish primary need. And remember, that is done through, with sales, taking them through 3 phases of awareness, admit, consequences, and personalization. So the advertising message is, 1, identify the problem. The problem that we want to identify is their loss of money or gaining money. And that's what those topics were about. They were not about primary service factors or secondary service factors, because they are irrelevant if there's not a perception. So we identified the problem, you offered the solution, and then why you offer and deadline are some of the major factors. And that's why we send them the headline, etc., to the squeeze page, and that's why they sign up. And we hope for them to sign up, and we'd like for them to call. If they call, then we definitely have the absolute highest probability with a decent presentation of getting business with that attorney. That's optimal. Is it going to happen for the majority? No. Out of 100 people, would you like 1 to 5 to 7 of those people? Yes. That's kind of the numbers. But let me tell you, out of that 1, 5 to 7 that sign up, that should be a slam dunk when you give your sales presentation. That business should be done, because remember, we've already affected trust, defenses, confidence, and resistance significantly through the process, and we've established need, the highest motivating need, the money lost, and we've been able to establish the primary service factors and the secondary service factors. So that should be a slam dunk. And if they don't call you, the people that have been through that process, you still have a much greater likelihood when you contact them, because of the exact same things I just talked about. So that's the step. Now, that's the from publicity to advertising. So when we send out the advertising is the letters and the follow-up postcards, etc., to get them engaged into this automated response, this video response, whether it's the auto responder, whether you're sending them a video of one of your systems regularly, way more effective than having that visual communication. than not visual. Way more effective at being you than at not being you. Way more effective having the multiple contacts than not having the multiple contacts. So you can position yourself much, much better when the actual communication or when you actually meet with them occurs. And then, of course, the last, that's the advertising. So the advertising, and remember, advertising will only get people, personal injury attorneys, that have a perceived need. Most personal injury attorneys do not have a perceived need. And if they do, like we said, they find somebody pretty quick. But remember, 75% of the attorneys don't refer out. And remember, only 32% of patients see chiropractors. So there's a vast majority of attorneys who are not quarterbacking this case and are not using chiropractic services. And remember, 87% of the patient or the potential patients have a connective tissue problem. So you have very big markets. But the point being is they are not proactively looking for you. And so advertising generally will not take them through the 3 phases of awareness: admit, consequences, and personalization. We use advertising to establish need, help increase need, or take from an unconscious perception to a conscious perception, something that they may not have been aware of that they're losing out on. And so that's how we use advertising to increase the awareness, to position them for the sales. Because the sales, when you meet with the attorney, you have to take them through 3 phases of awareness or they will not. They have to have a primary need through the admit, consequences, and a personalization, or you're not going to get business from that attorney. So this is the process of psychologically taking that attorney through sequentially and getting the business. So if you do the publicity, we do the advertising, it's multiphasic, it's visual, they see it repetitively. We're constantly affecting the trust defenses. The trust and confidence are going up by all these factors. The defense and resistance are going down because of all these factors. Their state of unconsciousness comes up to a higher state of awareness. Is it real high? No. It's high enough to either meet with you and connect with you, either them to reach out, or when you reach out, they're way more amiable to go, what is this about? That's interesting, what I saw on those videos. So their defenses and resistance are way lower and they're much easier to sell. Okay, so these are all the factors that we're putting in line. So when you do give the presentation, it's a slam dunk close, okay, and you get the business. So that's the advertising. And so the only point we're making is, are you going to probably get much business from your publicity alone? No. No, that's the easy fruit. And there's not much easy fruit in any particular target market. And when there is, it goes fast. Number 2, then there's the advertising. Well, how many personal injury attorneys are looking for chiropractors? Well, not many. Most of them don't use them by far, and they don't refer their patients to them. That's the bad news. The good news is the exact same thing if you understand how to tap into it, which is what we do. So that's the advertising. And then that same target market. We don't change target markets. In other words, you don't start with publicity to your target market and then maybe not get a phone call or this or that and then totally change your target market. No, we're violating everything we're setting up. After the publicity and continuing with the publicity, we're going to go to the advertising. That multiple vertical effect is what works on their trust, defenses, resistance, and confidence, and helps to maneuver their perceived need, maybe from a low to no awareness to a slight awareness, to where the defenses and resistance are low, so your message, you can make it much easier to knock the ball out of the park with your sales presentation. So this is the difference, big difference in understanding and getting business. So the next cycle is the sales. So we've positioned, if we've done this well, we've positioned ourselves very well. So where are we at this point? Well, we've started with the best list, number 1. We've started with introductions. We've started with active and passive referrals. That's the list we've started with. And from there, we started with publicity, high awareness, trust, and authority, preferably multiple times. And from there, we've moved to advertising with the same list. Remember the power of multiple contacts likewise. And we're always trying to impact trust, defense, resistance, confidence. So then the advertising we kick in, and we'd like to, the advertising message is a primary need message, not a primary service or secondary service message. Preferably, we'd like to have visual, and we'd like to, because we communicate visually preferably, and we'd like it to be you, because immediately they start developing trust in you and their defenses go down in you and you become even more of authority. This is why we're using video and you with the advertising message. This is also why we want to have them sign up for the autoresponder, because multiple contacts, the byproduct of multiple contacts is increased trust, decreased resistance, increased confidence, increased trust and confidence, decreased resistance. So that's the effect of multiple contacts. So these are all the sequences that we're putting in place to make this the absolute highest, most effective marketing. And then once that's happened, they're either reaching in, we've either taken their awareness from unconscious incompetence where there's no perceived need to what's this about? And then once that happens, they'll either contact in, because we do have calls to actions. And when they contact in, that particular person, you have the best opportunity to bring through a sales presentation, and that's a separate video, the sales presentation, essentially when you meet the attorneys, and that's taken that personal injury attorney. Imagine where they're at this point now by the time you sit down and do a sales presentation, which essentially takes them through admit consequences and personalization with their primary need. It's a slam dunk. So this is the process of sequentially nailing personal injury attorney after personal injury attorney. So even if they don't call in, now I have a prime target market through my publicity, my multiple contacts, my authority, my trust, my visualization, the videos that they've seen or they haven't seen. I've sent videos out. I've positioned myself within those categories. And what are the same? Remember, you got to keep, every time you do this, you got to keep remembering these categories: trust, defenses, confidence, and resistance. That's what you're always dealing with. And then you're dealing with primary need. Loss primarily is the message, not gain, loss. And then it's followed by the primary, secondary service factors. So you've positioned yourself very, very well. As a matter of fact, they're not going to, if it's sequentially like that, you've nailed the primary need, secondary, tertiary. The only reason you won't get to business essentially is they just don't like you. Number one, it has nothing to do with need or business. Number two, they have an absolute high trust category that they're dealing with, and it's hard to break relationships with existing relationships. Or they absolutely have no business at all for your particular geographic location. That's it. That's the only reason, and those are very, very rare. Those are easily those are very rare on a percentage basis. So that takes to the sales presentation. So remember, in the sales presentation, we're going to focus on the need, the defenses, and the resistance. So how are we going to, what are some important factors for this meeting? Now remember, we should already have had multiple contacts, visual media, publicity, endorsements, testimonials. When the meeting occurs, there needs to be, at that particular time, it cannot be in a public setting, because you're going to take them down, their defenses, or excuse me, their awareness to a pain-based problem. And if they're around anybody else, there's, peer pressure does not allow us to say that we're messing up, we're not doing things right. So if you do this in a group setting, they're going to be naturally way more defensive, and it's going to be harder for you to go into their consciousness and to admit the negative consequences of what they're not doing. So you do not want to do the actual final sales presentation in a group setting at all, because of the peer pressure will counter what you're trying to do. So, and then all we're trying to do is affect their consciousness with the primary need. Okay? Do not have a meeting. Do not do a sales presentation without these factors have taken place, without the visualization, the need realization. So you see, even though I may want to target somebody, and let's say it is even a cold call. Well, I can still create systems through publicity and multiple contacts and visualization. Before I meet with this person, at least if they haven't gone through my system, then the very least I can do is send them a publicity article prior to meeting them, plus a video or prior to meeting them. The very minimum, so when I actually do meet with them, I already have something working for me that's affected the trust, defenses, and need. Never, ever meet somebody for the first time who hasn't been positioned and try to do a sales presentation. Never. You're asking for absolutely high rejection. So we're going to be paying attention to multiple contacts. Let's see here. Visual, we've talked about a lot of these factors. Let me give you a classic example. So if we walk through, this is essentially what would happen, is we'd start with a high trust list. In other words, we had the introductions, we had the referrals, existing attorneys, past attorneys, also any attorneys, personal injury attorneys that are in your church, you go to school with, in your neighborhood, or maybe went to the same undergraduate college as you. There's already a natural connection with these people. So we've already started with a higher probability target list. Then we wanted to pay attention to the bell curve of the demographics. It's not everybody and anybody. The bell curve of the psychographics, the bell curve of the geographics, the bell curve of the psychographic barriers, the bell curve of the vehicle of delivery, and this is why we may use letters, and we'll pay attention to, remember, the category of multiple channels. This is why we'll use letters. This is why we'll use postcard. This is why we'll use a phone. This is why we'll use a fax. Is multi-channel stimulation and its relationship to trust, defenses, resistance, and confidence. So these are important factors in the marketing program. The more you do right, obviously, hopefully you can see you have a greater success. The less you do, then your success continually goes down, because now you're fighting with trust and resistance, and essentially it's trust versus defenses and need. And the less you do of any of these factors, the harder it is to overcome that. And you better be very, very good at sales to overcome that. And most very, very good salespeople will do everything they can not to position themselves without all these factors that set them up. So we have created name awareness by now. You've increased trust, decreased defenses and resistance. By now, you should have created the need, or to some degree of need and curiosity. Then we set the sales meeting. Now, the goal of the sales meeting at this particular point is establish need, which is to increase pain and eliminate obstacles. So after all this is taking place, when the actual meeting occurs, you're dealing with essentially two factors. Remember, it's the vacuum of trust. Now, if we did all these factors, we should already have a tremendous, or much, much greater likelihood of trust, and much, much lower defenses and higher confidence. Because remember, the ultimate presentation is a trust. Where is it at in a relationship of trust to two factors? It's need versus obstacles. And that's what the sales presentation does. It helps to take them down and take them from a state of unconscious incompetence to a consciousness. When you're done with this sales presentation, they will have a need if you did it right. The degree of the need will be relevant. Well, if you haven't done many of these other factors in advance, maybe you did the presentation on a scale of 1 to 10, you took them to maybe a 3 of awareness of the need, with 10 being the most. Well, maybe you would have started at a 3 if you would have done the publicity, advertising, and the multiphasic visual to effect. Now, you would have started with a 3, and then after your presentation, you'd be at a 6. So you'd be much better positioned with this effect. Okay, so the absolute core of the sales presentation is essentially that. It's trust. Where is this relationship of trust relative to need versus obstacles? That's it. And how good are you at that? Well, that's what I show you in the sales presentation. That is a totally separate video series. And then being aware of the primary service factors, and also be aware once a need's established, the primary service factors become the obstacle. So if you aren't doing the primary service factors we talked about, then that becomes the issue. And remember, the primary service factors were the location, willing to negotiate, financial drivers, and transportation. So those become the reasons for them not to do business with you. So you have to have much greater perceived need if you don't have those factors in a line. So be aware that the primary service factors become the obstacles, but they don't have to be if you already have those in line and you've positioned yourself. And then the follow-up. The vehicle, and then we always want to follow up, because even after all that we just said, they may not be ready to start business, etc. But a common mistake right now is the chiropractor walks away and never communicates with this person again. Well, you have the best possible candidate right here because of the law of familiarity. They're way more from you. You already have your foot in the door. So that's the person who you definitely follow up with, unless they violate the law of psychographics, which I talked about. Then they get fired and you move on and they're off your list. Otherwise, even if you did not, through that cycle, even if you did not, that person is the best person to follow up with because of how much you've already affected trust and confidence and defenses and resistance. So they're way greater toward the tipping point. But what typically I see is the chiropractors walk away from this individual. There's no more communication with this person at all. Well, that's your best target market from a marketing standpoint right now. That's who you should continually follow up with. Secondly, when you follow up, what should the follow-up messages be? They should always be reminders of one of the primary need factors of loss and how what you're doing is the solution. That's how the follow-ups, not about the ball games. Okay, so anytime you follow up with your target market, it should be identifying their problems and reminding them of your being the solution. That's what your follow-up should be, whether it's a newsletter format, a phone call, a personal communication, whatever it is. So that's why one of the things we're putting together now with the follow-up with the existing attorneys is making sure that they is a brief newsletter that reminds them of all these financial drivers and the money they're losing and how you solve those financial drivers. Okay? So that's the follow-up aspect. Okay? So some of the things that we follow up with is it's best if it's visual and it's personal. These are some factors. We like to use the DVD material because 55% of how we communicate is visual. There's a much more emotional response, and it's personal emotional. I just talked about the news brochure. That's when we identify the primary need. We talked about follow-ups, even follow-ups with the press releases. So that's the follow-up category. So let me just cover briefly some of these keys in summary. The keys to the publicity is it's an unbiased source with authority. High third-party trust. We want to make it relevant. We don't want to just give a press release or a publicity to a particular target market that's not relevant to their primary need factors. By the way, what do I mean by that? They don't care about chiropractic. This is not about pushing chiropractic. They don't care. Chiropractic is not a primary need in their life. Okay? So it's about making or losing money. That's what civil suits are about. And saving time. That's what the categories are. That's what makes it relevant. Do not push chiropractic. The authority, publication, organization, so the authority. Some examples of this would be with relative to publicity. If you were the author of maybe nutrition magazines, well, they don't care. That's publicity that's good for a certain target market, but not for the personal injury attorney. How does that affect their loss of money or gain of money? It doesn't. Versus if you were the author of a soft tissue injury article. See, that's relevant. Or another example would be your chiropractic message versus the financial driver. See, they don't care about chiropractic. They care about their financial drivers. Or if you were the author in a chiropractic journal, versus you are the author in their trade journal, the personal injury attorney trade journal. See, so these are some differences with publicity. Then some of the keys to advertising. Remember, bottom-up advertising. We never want to do name recognition. Never. And you want to try to stay away from bottom-down advertising at all costs. And you want to stay away from cold calls and leads. You want to do bottom-up advertising. Direct response advertising is the best way. And it's emotional pain-based, not cognitive. Remember, we use emotion to get them in, cognitive to keep them. So it's emotional, not the chiropractic benefits. Number 3 is the bell curve in all sectors. Pay attention to your bell curve in your demographic sector, your geographic. All of these will increase the sweet spot and the probability of you getting business and make the end result, the presentation, way easier, much, much, much easier. So pay attention to that. Multiple contacts. How important is it to have multiple contacts prior to you? Remember, multiple contacts relative to trust, defenses, confidence, and resistance. So yes, we'd like to have multiple contacts, more than one, if at all possible, prior to you giving a presentation. And most chiropractors are just ready to, they're chomping at the bit. They want it now. They want it sold. They want it all sold yesterday. Well, it's not going to work. You're going to make it a lot harder on yourself. A lot more rejection. Visual. This is why we use DVDs. This is why we use the internet, because 55% of how we communicate is visual. All of us would much rather see something for a minute or two than to read something. That's why everybody watches TV and not many people read books. So multiple channels. That's why we're going to use the mail. We're going to use letters. We're going to use postcards. We're going to use phone. And this is all in the marketing system when I explain how to employ the marketing system. It's the effect of multiple channels. And making an offer, giving them an offer and possibly even some time of limit or deadline. And definitely what to do next, a call to action. And even if none of these people do any of this, if they've just gone through the system, you are so much better off, and you have the highest probability when you do the sales presentation. And even if they don't sell and you don't get the business with the sales presentation, you've got the best target market for the follow-up. But you need the follow-up, and it needs to be pain solution-based follow-up. This is how you can significantly increase your personal injury attorney referrals, and even with the ones you do have, get more business from them. So the follow-up is best if it's personal and visual. We like to use DVDs, etc. Okay, so these are all the factors that we're looking at. So the core is the communication is enveloped in trust. That's the core. And we're dealing with how much trust can we affect in the communication. And we use multiple ways that we've discussed to affect trust. Trust, defenses, confidence, and resistance. We're using multiple factors to affect those, to position yourself to establish the need. And remember, most personal injury attorneys do not have a perceived need. Now, that's great news. Most chiropractors don't like that because they don't know sales. But if you know sales, that's great news, because there's a tremendous amount of business out there to be had. And remember, the sales presentation is a total separate video series. So the core is the communication, the highest target probability list. So we're trying to affect the trust as much as possible and have the highest probability. That's the bell curve of the demographics, etc. And then it's need analysis and being aware that there's an unconscious perceived need by far. And so all these factors affect that and help to bring that need up. And then eliminating the obstacles, and that's the importance of doing the primary service factors, because they become the obstacles. So those are factors that affect. So some of the other factors that affect trust is the introduction, active referral, passive referral, authority. We talked about speaker, multiple contacts, visual. We talked about the different types of need, whether it's a present pain need, future pain need, of present pleasure, future pleasure, curiosity. Remember, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, present pain need, especially with attorneys, the money they're losing, and that's the sales primary. So I give you two in the sales presentation. One is establishing the money they're losing. The other one is showing how to make more referrals. So we nailed down both of their needs, but by far 80% easily is what they're losing, not what they're gaining. And then the obstacles, being aware of the obstacles, and the obstacles are going to be the primary service factors. And so whatever you can do, and that's also why we like to change the name. So if we change it to personal injury attorney marketing to the auto accident injury name, make sure you are in control of the primary service factors we talked about. Those are the obstacles. So then we establish need, eliminate obstacles, and that's what gets the business. And then of course the follow-up relative to that. So this was a little bit longer. It was one topic relative to the whole hour, but I wanted to give an overview of exactly how this works, and that's the personal injury attorney formula. So we start with publicity, we go to advertising, and then we end with, or we nail it down with sales, and then it's multiple follow-up. The follow-up is based on a primary need and you being the solution. So there's tremendous amount of business out there. It's just knowing how to get it and putting it in place. All right, this is Dr. Paul, and we'll see you on the next program. You take care.